Okay, play along with me just for a minute, okay? So your boss calls you into her office and she says, you have been doing a great job lately. In fact, so good, I'm gonna reward you with a little bonus. This Friday, there's gonna be a little something extra in your paycheck. Cool, extra money, right? Now we all respond to this a little bit differently, but you know how you would respond. Are you one of those people who you're like, man, I'm going to save this, Christmas is coming, I can buy gifts? Or are you one of those people who you've mentally spent that money before you even leave the office? Who are my savers? Come on, show of hands. Who's going to save some of that money? Okay, good. Who's going to spend it? Yeah, it's extra money. Spend it, right? Okay, good. One more. You're at, let's say you're at the casino, you're playing those penny slots and just kind of playing. All of a sudden, whistles and bells, lights are going off, right? You win. And let's say you win big. Let's say you win $10,000, okay? Now you have a choice to make. You can cash it out right now. You can get that voucher. You can go get your money. Or you're playing on house money. You can keep going, right? Who's cashing out? Who's getting their money right now? Give it to me. Who's going to keep playing? Yeah. Keep playing. All right. One more. There's a knock on the door. Someone's coming to tell you that you have a dead rich uncle. He just passed away. You didn't know him, so you're not sad. All you know is you're getting a big heap of money. You can share that money. You can maybe give some to charity. You can maybe buy gifts for people you love, or you kind of been wanting to remodel the old place a little bit. You're driving a clunker. You could use a vacation. Are you sharing that money? Are you spending that money? Yeah, it's kind of fun. It's kind of fun to pretend about money that's not ours, right? It's really easy. I've noticed it's really easy to spend money that's not mine, that I can just kind of pretend with. What we know is it's a lot harder to manage our own money, isn't it? We have lots of ideas about what we would do if we had just a little bit more, or if we were spending someone else's and it didn't really touch our bottom line. Harder to make those things a reality, to take those principles into our real life when it's ours. So we're starting a new sermon series today. And for the next number of weeks, we're going to just have some conversations about what does the Bible teach about money and generosity. And I already know some of you are like, this is uncomfortable. You're like, honey, hide your purse, because the church just wants money, right? That's what the church is here for. The church just wants money. This isn't that conversation, okay? I'll tell you a little secret. I'm going to let you in on a little secret. There are some churches, who, when money gets tight, they do a sermon series on generosity, on money, and on giving. And the hope is that people will be convicted, mostly that people will feel guilty, and they'll give more money to the church, right? Okay, you guys know me. You know me well enough by now. If the church needed money and was in trouble, what would I do? I'd just ask. I'd walk right up those stairs. I'd come up here on a Sunday morning and I'd go, wallets and purses, let's go. We need some cash, right? Because that's what a family does. And what I know about you all is you go, great, and just start peeling it off, because that's what a family does. Here's why this series. Because the Bible teaches that everything belongs to God. That it is all His, all the time, all the relationships that you have, all the talents that you have, all the influence that you have, your job, a home, apartment, car, and yes, your money, it is all God's. But most of us, we don't live like that, do we? I know for me, for about the first 30 years, especially of my life, I was like, it's mine. It's all mine. And somewhere along the way, God got a hold of my heart and showed me that no, it's His. And here's the deal. If the money, if everything belongs to God, then I don't have to stress about it, because it's His and He cares more about it than I do. If the money is all His, then I don't have to ruin my marriage over fighting about it, because it's not mine anyways. And so maybe in these conversations that are so often filled with a sense of shame and we immediately get defensive, right? Maybe it's a topic where there's freedom and there's goodness. And so we're going to explore this over the next couple of weeks. We're going to have some conversations about just honestly, what does the Bible teach about money and generosity? So we're going to start that today in Matthew chapter 25. If you brought a Bible with you, you want to follow along on your phone, make your way over to Matthew chapter 25. If it's your first time here, we don't always talk about money. I know what happens when you visit a church. One of three things happens. You ready? There's a guest speaker, they talk about money, or they talk about sex. Every time you visit a church, something uncomfortable happens, okay? Listen, we just teach the full counsel of God here, and so we're going to have some conversations about what does the Bible say about money. When Jesus was on earth, he talked about money as an illustration more than anything else. He talked about money more than heaven and hell combined. Why? Because he knew that this was a topic that would get at our heart. He knew we are sensitive about this. He knew that we take it very personal, and he knew that we would listen. Today, he's going to tell a story, and in this story, he's going to ask us to reflect. He's going to surface for us sort of this question that we're going to talk about today, and it's just simply this. Am I being faithful? Are you being faithful to God with what he has given you? That's as far as we're going to make it today. We're going to look at this question, consider, am I being faithful to God with what he has given me? So Matthew 25, 2 days before Jesus will go to the cross, he's going to tell his disciples, he says, I'm going to die, but he says, I'm going to come back. And in this conversation, what he's showing them is he's leaving, for a while, he's going to come back, and he's challenging them in this moment. He's giving them instruction about what they are to do while he's gone. And so one of the things he challenges them to in this parable, this little story here, is he challenges them to be faithful to God with what God has given them. So Matthew chapter 25, this is Jesus speaking. I'm going to go through this whole story, just a couple quick little pit stops, but mostly just going to read through this whole story. He tells a story to ask us, we're being faithful with what God has given us. Here we go. Matthew 25, verse 14. Jesus says, again, it will be like a man who goes on a journey, calls his servants to him, and he entrusts his wealth to them. To one of the servants, he gives 5 bags of gold. To another one of the servants, he gives 2 bags of gold. And to another one, he gives 1 bag, each according to his ability. And then he went on his journey. And the man who had received the 5 bags of gold went at once, and he put his money to work, and he gained 5 bags more. So also the one with 2 bags of gold gained 2 more. But the one who had received 1 bag, he went off, and he dug a hole in the ground, and he hid the master's money. So when you're reading a parable, you got to try and work your way through the metaphor. You got to kind of step back and go, what is it that Jesus is trying to say? So Jesus, of course, in this metaphor, speaking directly to the disciples, he is the master, right? Because he's in this conversation, in this framework of, I'm going to die, I'm going to be leaving for a while, and I'm coming back. But as we sort of play out the metaphor, he's talking about how he entrusts his disciples with many things. And so if you're a note taker this morning, I'm just going to give you a couple of bullet points to sort of summarize this story as we go through it. And you can just start here, okay? With this, that the master, this is the flow of Jesus' story, that the master entrusts his servants with his money. It's not theirs. Okay, so the master comes to them, I'm going on a journey, I'm going away, and while I'm gone, I'm trusting you with my money. He gives bags of gold to each of these servants. I'm trusting you with my money. It's not yours, it's for you to take care of while I'm gone. Okay, keep reading this story. After a long time, verse 19, after a long time, the master of those servants returned, and he settled accounts with the servants. The man who had received 5 bags of gold brought the other 5. Master, he said, you have entrusted me with 5 bags of gold. See, I have gained 5 more. And his master replied, well done, good, faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things, so I will put you in charge of many things. Come, share in your master's happiness. And the man with 2 bags of gold also came, and he said, Master, you have entrusted me with 2 bags of gold. See, I have gained 2 more. And the master again replies, well done, good, faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. And then the third man, the man who had received 1 bag of gold, came and said, Master, I knew that you are a hard man, harvesting where you have not sown and gathering where you have not scattered seed. So I was afraid, and so I went and hid your gold in the ground. See, here's what belongs to you. Here's this 1 bag, right, of gold. So the master is going away in this story, but only for a while, and he'll come back. And he's going to ask, when he comes back, he's going to ask his servants what they've been doing. And so servant number 1 and number 2, they take the money and they turn it into more. They presumably go and start businesses or something, and they turn it into more. And so they've invested what the master has given them, right? And so the master comes back and they bring the money, all of it, to him. Notice they're not making it for themselves because it's not theirs. They're making it for the master. And so they come back and they do what? They bring him his initial investment and they bring him his profits. He gets the initial and the earnings back. Why? Because it's his money, right? It's not theirs. They don't get a commission. They don't hold something for themselves. If the master wanted to give them something, that's fine, but they don't get to make that decision because it's not theirs. And then you have the third one, and the third servant, and he buries the 1 bag of gold in the ground. Okay, so just sort of next, let's add to this sort of our statements, our summary statements. The next is that the master will return and the servants will give an account of what they've done. So this is the story Jesus is telling. The master is going away. The master entrusts his servants with his money. The master will return, and the servants will give an account of what they've done while he's gone. Okay? Master wants to know, what have you been doing with what I gave you? What have you been doing with what I trusted you with? Good. Okay, keep going. Almost done. Verse 26. The master replied, this is to the third servant, right, who said, I just buried your gold in the backyard. I didn't do anything with it. The master replied, you wicked, lazy servant. So you knew that I harvest where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed? Well, then you should have put my money on deposit with the bankers so that when I return, at least I'd have some interest. I'd have my money back with interest. So take the bag of gold from him, the master says, and give it to the one who has 10 bags. For whoever has will be given more, and they will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken from them. He says, throw that worthless servant outside into the darkness where there'll be weeping, gnashing of teeth. So this is the last part of the parable. Add to your notes that the master will reward his servants based on what they've done. So this is the story that Jesus has just told, right? This is what he's showing us. There's a master. The master is going away on a journey. The master entrusts his servants with what is his. It's not theirs, it's his. The master someday will return, and the servants will give an account of what they've done. What have you been doing with the master's stuff while the master is gone? And then third, the master will then reward his servants based on what they've done. This is the story he tells. This is the parable that he tells to his disciples. So what's he saying to them? He's saying, your master, Jesus, is going away. And disciples, you've been entrusted, he says, with many things. Money is certainly one of them, but you've been entrusted with many things. You've been entrusted with time. You've been entrusted with other possessions. You've been entrusted with relationships. To the disciples, you've been entrusted with the gospel. You've been entrusted with a kingdom assignment to go and share the gospel, right? They have been entrusted with many things. And he's saying, Jesus, he's the master. Jesus is going away, but he will come back. And when he does, his sons and daughters will give an account of how they've managed or how they've stewarded what is his and what they've been given, right? And each will be rewarded then based on what they've done. They'll give an account, and then they will be rewarded based on what they've done. So, okay, start to connect the dots a little bit, right? He's telling this parable to his disciples, but he's talking to all followers of his. He's talking to us. What's he saying? He's saying that God has given us many things. You have time. You have talents, you have relationships, you have influence. And yes, you have resources, you have money. And Jesus died, and he rose again, and he ascended to heaven. But one day he's coming back, and you and I will give an account of what we've been doing while he's gone. We will give an account of how we have handled the things that are his while he's gone, including money. And then God will reward his sons and daughters based on what they've done. Do you see that? You see, that's the meaning of this story, right? Now, listen, even the heart of Jesus here starts to come out, right? Because he says that God would reward his sons and daughters. So what happens with any conversation about money in church, what we tend to do is we get defensive and we step back and we feel shame and we're like, oh, God is shaming us. God is that's not what this is. Jesus is telling a story first to try and get us hope-filled. Oh, there's reward waiting for servants who handle what they've been entrusted well. There's reward waiting for sons and daughters of God based on what we've done. And so he's trying to show us hope. He's also calling to us to obedience, right? And so it's like God has given instruction. Are you being obedient to it? And so it's like a both and, but none of this is shame. None of this is Jesus like, hey, don't screw this up, or guess what's going to happen when I come back. He's not talking. That's not how he's presenting this. It's something hopeful. Jesus goes, I'm going away from the world. He's reigning in heaven. While he is away, he's given us to be the manager of things, the steward of things, all kinds of things. And one day he's coming back and we will give an account of what we've been doing, right? And so this whole story really is just to hold a mirror up to us, to ask that same question, to ask it again. Are we being faithful? Are you being faithful to God with what he has given you? He's given you all kinds of things. Are you being faithful? Because you're going to have an account for it today, someday. Are you today being faithful with what God has given you? Okay, I want to drill into the passage a little bit because there are a couple things that jump out to me, almost kind of bother me a little bit in one case. And I've told you this before, when we read parables, they're not there for us to overanalyze them. We're not supposed to squeeze them to death until nothing else comes out. That's not the point. They're just an illustration. And so we're supposed to find sort of what is the primary meaning of what Jesus is saying. So we're not going to squeeze every little detail, but there are a couple of things that jump out to me in this story that I want to look at and I want to show you. One is this, is that the master goes on his journey, right? And he assigns the management of his wealth while he's gone to his servants, but it's not even. And that kind of bugs me. Like, wait a minute. Calls the servants. Why doesn't he say, I have all of this, you guys work together and manage it? Or you take this part, you take this part, a third, a third, a third. That's not what he does, right? He goes, you get 5 bags, you get 2, you get 1 bag. And he distributes it to them in sort of this uneven way. What's the deal with that? Jesus says, watch this, Jesus says in verse 15, he explains a little bit of it. Jesus says this, he says that the master, here's how he chose what he was going to give. The master gave each according to their ability. So when it comes to money, or anything really, God has determined what we can handle. He sees things about us. He sees things about our ability. He sees things about our character. And he knows what each of us can handle. See, our tendency is to go, well, how come I didn't get as much as her? How come he has more than me? But God sees, he knows all, and he sees our character, our ability. He sees things that we don't, and so he makes decisions on how to give what he has given. And here's the deal on this. Like, we don't have to like this, but here's the deal. God doesn't have to explain himself to anyone, right? And I know we want to understand this. How come my friend has more than I do? How come my sibling gets more than I do? Jesus doesn't even try to give us an answer to that here. Sometimes God distributes unevenly, at least as we see it. But God is giving each according to their ability. He can give whatever he wants. It's all his, and he doesn't owe us an explanation, but he gives to each according to their ability. Not more, not less. He gives to each according to their ability. And we don't have to like that, but we can trust that it's good and true because God's character is good, and he's a good father. And so something I just want you to keep in your mind as we walk through this the next couple of weeks, and I know we're just scratching the surface today, but as we walk through this next few weeks, something I want you to remember. We tend to judge people and things on how much they have. God is not testing us on how much we have. God is examining how well we use it. So what you have in life is going to be different than what I have in life, which is going to be different than what someone else has in life. But that's not the question. The question is, how are you using what you've been given? Are you using what you've been given in a faithful way, in a God-honoring, walking in faith kind of way? Or in a wasteful way, in a sinful way, lots of other ways, right? That's what we're pushing on here. That's why it doesn't do any good to judge other people based on how they spend their money, based on how they spend what God has given them, because you don't answer for what, you don't have to give an account for what they do, but you do have to give an account for what you do. And so Jesus here, he just moves beyond this stuff, beyond the comparison stuff. He doesn't even slow down for that. He's just like this, the master gives what the master wants to give. And so each, according to his own ability, God decides that, and our job is to be faithful to that. Now, something else that stands out in the story. There's this third guy. Remember the third guy goes and buries the gold, and the master's not happy about it, right? What's the deal with this guy? Well, he says something that's really interesting to me. When he comes to give his account, when he comes to explain himself to his master, here's what he says. He says, I was afraid, right? He says, I was afraid, so I hid the gold that you gave me. And those words jumped off the page to me. And I went, man, I have heard those words before. I was afraid, so I hid. So you don't have to turn there, but let me take you back to the beginning of the Bible for just a minute. Remember in the Garden of Eden? Adam and Eve are there, and it's wonderful. God has created this beautiful garden, and everything is there, right? And it's wonderful, and it's good. God says it's very good, all that he has created, and it's all theirs, except for there's one tree. And God says, hey, just that one tree, just leave that, don't worry about that. Leave that tree alone, right? It's the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And God says, just leave that tree alone. You don't need any part of that. Don't eat the fruit from it. Why does he say that to them? Because he's mean? No, because he's a good father, and he knows their abilities, and he knows that they can't handle the fruit from that tree, that the knowledge that that fruit provides them is too much for them. And so like a good dad, he says, hey, I've given you everything. Just this isn't for you today, okay? Just leave this alone. He wouldn't set them up to fail. He's a good, loving father. So he goes, just leave this alone. You don't have to like it, but you have to trust me. Just trust my character. You can't handle that. But what do, right? They go and grab some of that fruit, and they eat it. And sin enters the bloodstream. And they immediately feel the weight of their sin, and they feel shame. And so there's this conversation. Again, you don't have to turn there, but there's this conversation. God comes looking for them. Right after they've sinned, he knows what they've done. They feel the weight of the shame of it. Watch this. Genesis 3, verse 9 and 10, God has this interaction with them. The Lord calls out to the man. He says, where are you? Listen to the man's response. I heard you in the garden. He's speaking to God. I heard you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, so I hid. It's the exact same thing. I was afraid, so I hid. It's the same response that the third servant has. I was afraid, and so I hid. Well, connect the dots. What's true about both of them? They forgot the character of God. In both cases, they didn't know the character of God. They didn't know that the master was good and gracious, that he's generous. They forgot that he's forgiving and understanding. And so they believed they had to protect himself. We should be afraid of him, and we have to protect ourselves from his wrath. Instead of leaning in to what God had told them, instead of leaning into what the master had for them. Because they know and trust his character, what did they do? They went and hid. They were afraid of him. And so they went and hid. I think for a lot of us, the sticking point on this conversation, the difficulty we have in even having this conversation and handling this conversation and then handling our money is do we know the character of God? Because absent the knowledge of the character of God, you will be afraid. You will be afraid that you won't have enough, that you have to protect yourself, that you have to hide what you have, because I don't have that much, and so God, this is off limits, this is mine, I will handle this. Absent the knowledge of the character of God, that I can trust him, and he's a good father, and he provides for me, and he's never let me down. And when we forget that he's good and generous and gracious, what do? We hide. We do this with everything in our lives. We do this with sin. Oh, God could never forgive me, so I have to hide this. We do this with things that we love and we want to protect. I don't want God to take this away from me, so I'm going to hide it from him. We do this with money. Instead of seeing what God has done for each of us and remembering that he's a good father who's given each according to his ability. We say, I have to protect it. God hasn't given me enough. I don't have excess. If I had extra, I would have hands open, but I don't have enough, so I have to hide it and protect it. It's the same thing Adam and Eve did in the garden. It's the same thing the third servant did. I was afraid of you, God, so I hid. Instead of bringing it before him and going, Lord, it's all yours. What do you want me to do with this? I trust you. I trust your character. You're good and generous and gracious. And so I think often we see the master, we see God as harsh. We forget that he's generous. And so Jesus is calling us up. He's calling us up to something. Not to live afraid, not to live with a scarcity mentality, but to remember that our master is good and generous. He is the source of all wealth and all provision. And while he is gone, he's given us what we need. Maybe not everything we want, but he has given us what we can handle. No more and no less, but exactly what we can handle and exactly what we need, each according to his ability. And he knows our abilities and he knows our character, and what he gives us is good. And so Jesus is again pointing at this question. Are you being faithful to God with what he has given you? Are you? This is really as far as we're going to make it in this conversation today. I want you to ask and reflect on this question. Am I being faithful to God? Meaning, am I walking in faith? Am I being God-honoring with what he has given me? And he's given us a lot. And maybe for you like this, maybe this lands in the financial area. Are you being faithful with the money that God has given you? But it could also be your time. Are you being faithful to God with the time that he has given you? Are you using your time to serve God and others, or are you being sinful and wasteful with the time that God has given you? You could apply this to your relationships. Parents, are you being faithful to both love, encourage, and discipline and correct the children that God has given you? Are you being faithful in your marriage? This relationship that God has given you? Are you being a faithful employee in the job that God has given you? All these things, if God looked at your life, if God looked at things like your calendar, your schedule, and your checkbook right now, would God say, well done, good and faithful servant. You are being faithful to me. Or would it be something else? And here's the good news. You ready? There's good news in this. And it's this. It's that the master hasn't returned yet. And so there's still time to be faithful. Right? He gave time for servant 1, 2, and 3 to be obedient. And it's likely that servant 1 and 2, by the way, they probably started businesses in this example. So they had to invest what they had been given. They went and invested the master's money into something to get it going, right? And so if the master had come back on day 2, there's a chance they had less money than what they had been given. But he gave them time to move towards obedience. And God gives us time to move towards obedience. And so if you're like, hey, I have not been faithful, I am not being faithful in what God has given me, great, today's the day, right? You can go, okay, God has given me time, and now I can point my life towards obedience, towards faithfulness. Not hide what I have, but bring it out into the light and say, God, this is all yours. What do you want me to do with it? God, how can I use what you've given me faithfully to be God-honoring? Because, God, I've been wasting it. I've been abusing what you gave me. I've been like a spoiled child and just complained that you haven't given me enough. So there's time to go, what can I do, God? And that's as far as we're going to go today. Just asking ourselves, are we being faithful with what God has given us? One more quick thing. We want to help you with this, so we have a gift for you. See, I told you the church doesn't just want your money. We're going to give you a gift. How do you like that? On your way out today, we're going to give you this book. It's called The Treasure Principle. Really super short, easy read. Very meaningful in my journey. This has been super helpful for me and for my family, and so I hope that it would encourage you. Real fast, we have one for each household. So please, we don't have quite enough, one for everybody, but one for each household. And so if you'd get this on your way out, they'll hand it to you. Maybe it'll collect dust on your shelf for 6 months, but you'll pick it up and you'll read it, and I bet you it helps you. Maybe you go home and read it this afternoon. It's rainy out and it's really short. It'd be great. Go home and read it this afternoon, and I think it will encourage you. And this is going to push you on this question. Am I being faithful? Am I being God-honoring with what he's given me and to just hold up everything that he has blessed us with and say, God, lead me to steward and manage this well. Let me pray for us. Father, thank you for your word. It both encourages us and holds us accountable. It gives us instruction and simultaneously gives us grace, abundant grace. God, you know the condition of each heart here. You know those of us who, when I said we're going to talk about money, you know those of us whose heart went, yes, I need direction in this. God, I want more understanding in this. And God, you know the hearts of each of us who said, I don't want to talk about this. And we got defensive and our hearts got hard and we started listing all the excuses. You don't understand. If I only had more. And you know the condition of our hearts and you're so gentle and patient with us. God, would you just help us today to examine our lives, to say, are we being God-honoring with what we have? Would you help us today to not be into that comparison trap, to not be like spoiled children who are mad because our brother or sister got more than us, to be humble servants, to examine our lives so that we could say, how, God, can we use what you've given us? We will give an account. We will be rewarded for what we've done, Jesus, and we want you to lead us. We haven't done it perfectly so far, but you will lead us and show us. So God, would you just humble us in this way today? Consider your word, to consider this question, how we are stewarding the things that you've given us. And God, I thank you for Jesus. You entrusted him to come, to live, and to die for our sins. And he was faithful to you, Father. And you've entrusted us with his love and his forgiveness so that we can have hope, life, goodness today and forevermore. God, we love you. Thank you that your character is good and that we can know you. Pray these things in Christ's name. Amen.